Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First, our panelists are Dan Campbell, editor of the Free Press. Our second panelist is Sylvia Murphy, former Monroe County Commissioner. The way that the forum works is that the candidates will have no opening statement. They will have a 1-minute time limit to answer each panelist's questions. We do have two timekeepers here, D.A. Aldridge and Jan Darden. They will be keeping track of the time, so candidates, please keep your eyes on the timekeepers. If a candidate mentions another candidate by name, that first candidate may have a 30-second rebuttal, and then each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute closing statement. I guess we will go ahead and get started. We have for United States Senator, so Mr. Nguyen, will you come up to the table, please? We also have via Zoom, Dennis Mizagoy. And we had invited candidate Stephen Grant, who is also supposed to come via Zoom, but I'm guessing that he was unable to make it.
I'm here.
He has his video on mute. Okay. Well, thank you for chiming in so we know you're here. So we're going to go ahead and start with the questions. Dan, would you like to start, please? Try. It was tested.
Okay.
There you go.
To mitigate against coastal flood risks, the Army Corps of Engineers has proposed a $2.5 billion plan for the Keys to stabilize shoreline along US 1 and flood-proof vulnerable infrastructure. Do you support authorizing construction and federal funding to get this plan moving forward? Why or why not? And the question is for all of the candidates.
Okay, well, let's start with Mr. Nguyen.
Good evening, everyone. And I believe that the Hurricane Ian that just taught us a lot of lessons. That we have a lot of things to take care of for Floridians. And I believe the federal government should provide any funding necessary. And part of, even though the actual operation might be taken care by the state level, but in my policies, I propose that the federal government the Senate should control the federal spending. We could save more money so we can allow more funding, FEMA, etc., and there's many other programs as well, so that we can cover and make sure that we can support the state when needed.
Okay, great, thank you. Since our participants on Zoom may not be able to see our timekeepers, I will be giving verbal cues at 15 seconds and then when you run out. So let's go ahead with Mr. Grant. We'll go alphabetically with the Zoom folks. Mr. Grant?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I would agree with that proposal from the Army Corps of Engineers. I am an avid diver myself. I was able to start and continue the Lionfish Derby when I was mayor of the city of Boynton Beach. And it is imperative that we expand and rehabilitate the coral reefs along the Florida Keys. We are the third largest reef system in the world. And there is numerous plant and sea life that we must support, because that is something with the growing population we need to protect our domestic production of food.
15
so
seconds.
I am all in favor of making sure that we beautify our environment by making it more resilient and sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Mr. Mizagoy.
Thank you. Ideally, it wouldn't necessarily be the federal government, and I'm not quite sure this sort of thing is necessarily constitutionally authorized, for a little bit of a sort of different take on it. But at the end of the day, I think I would still very much be likely to vote for it as a compromise, but I would like to see us take that money, particularly when we're talking about the Army Corps of Engineers, from some of the other places that money is being misspent currently. Our defense budget stands at over $750 billion. So we really need to be able to get the stuff that actually takes care of us here at home out of that rather than spending it on foreign adventures. So I'm happy to do this in the sense because, we can only change so much at one given time, but we've got to take the money from somewhere. We've got to be responsible because right now we're at over 31 trillion in debt. So we have to be mindful of that as well, particularly when we want to put the burden on others. Thank you.
15 seconds. Thank you. That was great. Okay. Sylvia, it's your turn to ask a question.
Okay.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
Again?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want it too close, though. Since the overturn of Roe versus Wade, what policy would you or do you support on abortion?
We'll start with you.
First of all, I believe this is women-related issues. As a man, it would be impossible for me to say one way or the other accurately. For me, it's okay to let the state decide either way that Roe v. Wade has been reversed. However, if it comes to the time that the Senate, at the federal level, had to codify a law pertinent to this reversal, this is my position. I would prefer to have a female senator introduce a bill to the Senate floor. And my position, since I'm a man, as I said, I will not know the exact nature how women would feel one way or the other. I would have a range of acceptance. At the bare minimum, I would allow abortion in case of rape, incest, and when the mother health is in danger. And I would go up to Roe v. Wade. But I would not be more open, make it easier than Roe v. Wade.
Thank you. Mr. Grant?
As an attorney, I was saddened to hear and disheartened to see that the current Supreme Court feels that there's a constitutional right for an unborn human being above the liberty of a woman. I would do what I could to reinstate Roe v. Wade, making sure that informed medical decisions are a constitutional right and that a federal, state, county, city government does not have the ability to restrict someone from getting a life-saving procedure. One of the things that I did as mayor was to encourage people to get vaccines, but I was against anyone forcing anyone to get a vaccine who decided they didn't want one.
15 seconds.
It's something where we as a society have to make sure we are protecting females letting them make the right decision for themselves.
Time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mizigoy?
So whether you view abortion as murder or as healthcare, whichever side of that divide you fall on or somewhere in between, typically we prosecute violent crimes at the state level or lower. And typically and the Constitution doesn't really authorize the federal government to regulate healthcare either. So I think the right decision is for it to be at the state level rather than for us at the federal level to be mandating. Me personally, I think you got to draw the line somewhere in between. I agree with Mr. Nguyen about you certainly want to have exceptions for certain extreme cases, but as a father of 3 myself, I certainly also have the personal belief that life begins sometime before birth, but not necessarily at conception. I do believe you really need to have somewhere in there. And I think that's where most Americans are. But I think you get there at the state level is more appropriate and certainly more constitutional.
15
depending
seconds.
upon how you define it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, question?
Yes. Again, for all the candidates, do you support universal background checks for gun sales? Why or why not?
I do. I believe that that is not an infringement of Second Amendment. We still have people who can bear arms. But given the fact that we have a net increase of fatalities due to, mass shooting, I'm support background check especially even for people who are quite young. I don't see why that we cannot background check people on 18 years old. Why that people have to be 21 to be drinking alcohol. I think that could apply as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grant?
Yes, on the Second Amendment, I would support a universal background check for all aspects of gun sales possible for commercial means. The main thing that I would also try to do to stop the mass shootings is to reinstate the ban on high-capacity magazines. Our Second Amendment allows our government, or does not allow our government to infringe on the rights of citizens to have firearms. However, it is something that our government has a requirement to make sure that our populace is mentally sound and stable, and I would hope
15
that
seconds.
for gun safety, similar to what they tried to do with DARE back in the 80s and 90s.
Thank you. Mr. Mizagoy.
So I don't, and I don't support universal background checks, primarily because whether or not you want to argue that this is a proper function of government and in violation of the Second Amendment, I think it creates part of the mechanism and the infrastructure to get a backdoor around it and to violate people's Second Amendment rights by having a database of everyone who has purchased a gun, or I should say more specifically, those law-abiding citizens who've gone through the correct process to purchase a firearm. Those are the ones who end up on this list. And if we understand the purpose of the Second Amendment, really, it is ultimately for that purpose to be as a bulwark against, tyranny, broadly speaking. And so, we don't want to necessarily enable that. And that is one piece of the puzzle where you create a federal database of everyone who's owned a gun. In addition to that, you have red flag laws pushed at the state level, particularly by our incumbent Senator Marco Rubio, who is supposed to be a pro-gun, senator, but has sponsored legislation to push red flag laws, nationwide. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia? Do you have a question for the candidates?
Do you believe the Electoral College should be abolished?
I do not believe so. I think the system has been well designed from the beginning to make sure that we will not all the state and the most populous state would have the say in the final election, in the final vote. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Grant, same question?
Yes. No, I think the Electoral College is sound. However, I would stop the dual ticket that has been going on since the third presidential election, and that's only one person per presidential ticket. The Constitution originally wanted to have the second place person to be the vice president. And so that is something that I would also want to support. And I would also, allow the states to have not necessarily the winner-take-all system, so that we have the ability for other candidates to get their say. And so we democratically choose the president by a majority of the people, not necessarily
15 seconds
of the states.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mizagoy?
So I wouldn't push for any changes along these lines. I mean, I do definitely think there's an argument to be made that, one person, one vote makes a whole lot of sense for any public office that we're directly electing. I think there's a lot of reasons why the Electoral College was instituted and created. By and large, the overwhelming majority of cases, it's a complete wash. The same person who wins the popular vote is the same person who wins the Electoral College. The one knock I'd have against the Electoral College, particularly from a third-party candidate perspective, is that essentially everybody who's not the top two basically gets erased. You go from somebody having maybe 5% of the vote or 3% of the vote, but when you look at the tally for the Electoral College, it creates the illusion that nobody voted for anybody but Republicans and Democrats. And I think that's a big problem, and it has something that is exacerbated and help preserve the image of the two-party system. So from that perspective, I think there's a definitely
15
argument.
seconds.
It is not something that I have any interest or in pushing legislation to, or really a constitutional amendment it would take to change that.
Great, thank you. Now each of the candidates will have a 2-minute closing statement.
Good evening. Our country is facing enormous challenges, from inflation, the war in Ukraine, illegal immigration, among other things. I believe this is the time for us to work together instead of fighting each other. And by having an independent voice, each side don't have to be afraid that their agenda will not be prioritized. In fact, in my case, for example, I'm running to be an independent senator, not to be against any party. In fact, I try to help both of them, and I want to make one case. Assuming there's a good bill proposal on the floor and being introduced by Democrats, even several Republicans might agree to that idea. But today, given the polarization, they will not side with it because they will be afraid of upsetting their political base. But the same bill, the same content, proposal, putting forward by me, I provide excuses for both sides to vote for it without being labeled a traitor or something. In that way, all the good bill will be passed and going forward to prevent the Washington gridlock that prevents us from making any progress so far. And I also believe that we need to work together. I believe this Hurricane Ian must have taught most of us, reminded us we are first and foremost American. Would you wait at that day, or I wait for the responder team from the Republican only? Or will I go and rescue only the Democrat victims only? I think this is the time for us to realize that we all share one common denominator, which is we are all first and foremost American. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Grant, your closing statements. Mr. Grant, did we lose you?
I'm still here. Thank you. So, as an attorney, as a former mayor, the reason why I'm campaigning for U.S. Senator is because I'm disheartened to see what the political parties are doing to our country, what the Supreme Court has allowed with Citizens United, that our legislatures just continues to allow independent expenditures to diminish the voice of everyday citizens and voters. I have the slogan, time for change, to that we create term limits for Congress and the aristocracy and corruption that has been going on, immigration court reform, having an independent judiciary that is adequately funded so that people who are seeking to stay in this country don't have to wait 2+ years to have their case heard. Military expansion. I believe that we need to make sure that we are safe in our country, and part of the way to that is to provide humanitarian aid and relief throughout the world and in here. I'd like to expand the AmeriCorps and Peace Corps and not make it a volunteer, but make it a service so that our youth have an opportunity to use their education to make our country better. And the last is environment beautification, to protect and preserve our natural and human environments. There has been over 200 years of pollution in our water, land, and air, and we are feeling the after effects of that pollution. We need to make sure that we keep our environment, create a circular economy to build and produce sustainable commodities, to build our own products, and bring back manufacturing to our country. And the last is for the human environment to make
15
sure
seconds.
that discrimination and make sure all people are free and equal in this country. Thank you so much to the League of Women Voters. I truly appreciate the ability to share my platform with everyone there tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Mr. Mizagoy.
Thank you so much. I'm not afraid to say that I am against the Republican and Democratic Party because the Democrats and the Republicans are the ones who've gotten us to this point. We're $31 trillion in debt, over 9% inflation, and that's just the official number. We are in conflicts all over the world, escalating through proxy wars and this other sort of stuff. Conflicts with nuclear armed powers, multiple at this point. It makes absolutely no sense, but it is a predictable consequence of keeping these two parties in power, allowing them to maintain this cartel. And so I applaud my two peers over here for entering the political arena and doing it outside of the two-party system. But I represent something fundamentally different as the Libertarian Party candidate, representing the third largest political party in the country. The best opportunity we have to break through the two-party system in a meaningful way, not just one person, but Florida can lead the way. And again, and not just in the sense of organizationally, but also in terms of policy. This is what's really important to me and what I want people to understand, a very big difference. I am the only anti-war, bring the troops home right now candidate. I am the only end the Federal Reserve, sound money through monetary freedom candidate. I am the only end the drug war candidate. I am the only cut spending now candidate, cut the overseas spending in particular candidate right now. I am the only personal freedom, pure Second Amendment, uphold your right to keep and bear arms candidate. I am the health freedom candidate. I am the protect your life, liberty, and property candidate. I am the I'm trying to think a few more over here. The police reform candidate and qualified immunity and civil asset forfeiture and no-knock raids. No victim, no crime. We have a lot of big changes to make, and I believe firmly that the path to peace and prosperity, both among us as nations and among us as individuals, in order to get away from the partisan bickering and the culture wars and everything else, is respect for individual rights. If we follow that path, the principles of peace and individual liberty, we can build a better nation and a better world.
Thank you,
this is what
Mr.
my policies
Mizagoy.
represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mizagoy. Thank you to all of our candidates for joining us tonight for the forum.
Thank you very much.
Sir, would you please grab your...
Thank you.
Mr. Nguyen, would you grab your sign? Yeah, thanks. We make them clean up after themselves.